Hello and welcome to the first National Conference on Men's Issues to be held in the UK. It will hopefully be the first in a long series of annual events because there are so many individual men's issues deserving conferences in their own right. This event was originally planned for a venue in Manchester, but the COVID-19 pandemic made that impossible, so we decided to hold an online event instead. We have a wonderful lineup of expert speakers, and I thank them all for their strong contributions. In our last general election manifesto, we explored 20 areas where the human rights of men and boys in the UK are assaulted by the actions and inactions of the state today, almost always to privilege women and girls. There are no areas in which the human rights of women and girls, specifically in the UK today, are assaulted by the actions and inactions of the state. None. In stark contrast to the feminist lie that women and girls are oppressed, they are deeply privileged, with men and boys paying the price. In many areas, the human rights of men and boys are assaulted by the state at the behest of feminists and feminist organizations. Feminists have steadily corrupted state institutions over the past half-century. The extent of feminist corruption of politics is illustrated by the fact that there is only one elected politician in the English-speaking world prepared to advocate for the human rights of men and boys on a regular basis. That politician is, of course, Philip Davis, a British Conservative MP who has been outspoken on the issue of domestic abuse, the focus of today's conference. There are few areas where feminist corruption has been so well documented as the area of domestic abuse. It's been almost 50 years since Erin Pizzey, the founder of the first refuge for women and children in Chiswick, London, was booted out of her refuge by radical feminists, who later started the organization Refuge, which is still with us today. The domestic violence industry is a huge money-making scheme with no concern for the suffering of men, and in complete denial about the scale on which women have long been known to be perpetrators. The industry also corrupts state organizations such as the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, said this: "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and/or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state." End of quotation. There are many big lies in the context of domestic abuse, invariably the inventions of feminists. The first one is that the overwhelming majority of the victims of domestic abuse are women. The second lie is that the overwhelming majority of the perpetrators are men. Sadly, these lies are repeated endlessly by the global mainstream media, which continue to display no interest in relating the truth about domestic abuse. I should like at this point to recommend a book by William Collins, the British blogger behind the website The Illustrated Empathy Gap. To my mind, the most important website in the world exploring gender issues. His 676-page-long book is titled The Empathy Gap, Male Disadvantages and the Mechanisms of Their Neglect, and it's very well worth buying. The section on domestic abuse runs to 35 pages. In the section on international studies of domestic abuse, Collins refers to the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge project, published in 2013. The project is the most comprehensive review of domestic violence research literature ever carried out. Extracts from Collins's book, in which he cites the project's conclusions. Men and women perpetrate physical and non-physical forms of abuse at comparable rates. Most domestic violence is mutual. Women are as controlling as men. Domestic violence by men and women is correlated with essentially the same risk factors, and male and female perpetrators are motivated for similar reasons. A key numerical result reported in the review was this. Among large population samples, 57.9% of interpersonal violence, IPV, reported was bidirectional, 42.1% unidirectional, 13.8% of the unidirectional violence was male to female, 28.3% female to male, end of quotation. So as far as unidirectional violence is concerned, men are victims twice as often as women. Far from women being the overwhelming majority of victims, they are clearly in the minority. Feminists are fond of claiming that more than 2 women a week in the UK are killed by partners or former partners. It is, as we would expect from feminists, a lie, and one explored by Deborah Powney in her talk today. Elizabeth Hobson in her talk will point to evidence that more men than women die as a result of domestic abuse, when domestic violence-related suicides are added to homicides, as they surely should be. I firmly believe far more issues should be considered as domestic abuse than usually are. And I should like to suggest this definition of domestic abuse. Abuse carried out by, usually, adults on adults and or children and or other dependents in the context of families and or interpersonal relationships. If we accept this definition, we can see that domestic abuse includes many areas not generally considered as examples of domestic abuse. It includes areas which impact on unborn children and children of both sexes, as well as men and women. And I'll say a few words about 7 of the areas. Number 1, abortion. What could be more abusive than killing an unborn child? In the UK alone, over 10 million abortions have been carried out since the Abortion Act was passed in 1967, 53 years ago. Every year, another 200,000 plus unborn children are killed. In the vast majority of cases, the killings happen on the grounds of protecting the mental health of the mother, although no evidence exists to show abortions have this therapeutic effect. It is simply a license for women to kill their unborn children with no consequences. In many cases, the unborn children's fathers are unaware of the killings, or would object strongly if they were made aware, and this is clearly abuse of those men. Number 2, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is the number 1 cause of avoidable mental incapacitation across the Western world. Pregnant women can drink themselves to oblivion every day, aware they're causing grievous bodily harm to their unborn children, and not be punished for it. If men caused grievous bodily harm to unborn children, they would receive extremely long prison sentences. What an extraordinary double standard that is. Number 3, fatherlessness. What could be more abusive than denying children access to their fathers? Yet the state does close to nothing to ensure children have ready access to their fathers in the event that women decide they should not. Philip Davis MP has proposed amendments to the Domestic Abuse Bill currently going through Parliament that would include in the definition of domestic abuse, denial of children's access to non-residential parents, parental alienation, and false accusations of domestic or sexual abuse. We wish him every success. Number 4, genital mutilation. Male genital mutilation, MGM, is carried out overwhelmingly by men and at the behest of men. In the UK, performing MGM is a crime under the Offences Against the Person Act 1861, being grievous bodily harm. The only interest that the British government has in the matter is collecting the taxes of the criminals who carry out this barbaric and deeply harmful crime. Female genital mutilation, FGM, is carried out overwhelmingly by women at the behest of women. In stark contrast to MGM, the British state has invested huge resources into ending FGM for over 30 years. Number 5, reproductive rights. In the area of reproduction, women have rights and no responsibilities, while men have responsibilities and no rights. After they become pregnant, women can have the unborn child killed at taxpayers' expense, or have the child adopted or raise the child themselves. They have the right not to become mothers. Men have no right not to become fathers. They often become fathers because women covertly frustrate contraceptive methods, most usually by claiming to be taking the contraceptive pill, but not doing so in reality. Number 6, paternity fraud. To my mind, frustrating contraceptive methods is one form of paternity fraud. More traditionally, paternity fraud is taken as when a man is led to believe he's the biological father of a child when he's not. This is a crime under the Fraud Act, but the Crown has never prosecuted a woman for paternity fraud. It is not deemed to be in the public interest to prosecute women for this egregious crime, presumably because all those committing the crime are women and all the victims are men. Number 7, sexual abuse. The largest individual section of the 20 sections in our last general election manifesto covered sexual abuse carried out by women. Chapter 20 of William Collins's book, The Empathy Gap, is titled Sexual Assault, The Story Less Told. The chapter is 34 pages long and mainly chronicles the evidence of women's sexual abuse of men and minors, both of which are far more common than is generally supposed. The failure of the criminal justice system to hold these women properly to account has grave implications for both men and women. Collins cites a number of studies concerning male prisoners convicted of sexual offences against women, and he writes this. The best estimate at present is that around half of male sex offenders against women have a childhood history of sexual abuse by a woman. Mothers feature largely in this abuse. End of quotation. Feminists are forever saying that men must be taught not to rape women, a ridiculous demand. They never say that women must be taught not to sexually assault men and minors. Perhaps it's time that they did, to be consistent, but then consistency is not one of their strong points. So these are 7 areas that should be included in conversations about domestic abuse and never are. It just remains for me to thank again all the speakers at today's conference, and I hope you enjoy the talks. Bye for now.